Welcome to our event, everybody, at the Resilience Hub. Thank you to everybody in the room and online for attending. It's an event, in case you don't know which one you're at, it's Women and Climate Resilience in Global Supply Chains. And we're going to have a really, really interesting panel and discussion. My name is Emma Cox, and I lead on climate at PwC. We're here to discuss the really important role that women play in tackling climate change in global supply chains and the barriers that they currently face and the sort of actions that we can take to overcome them. We're also here, excitingly, to launch a new report that's just been published by the Work and Opportunities for Women programme, which is the UK government's flagship Women's Economic Empowerment programme that we at PwC and our alliance of CARE International, BSR and Social Development Direct run. So Work and Opportunities for Women has the wonderful acronym WOW, and I have always loved that as a title. WOW provides technical assistance to businesses to enhance economic empowerment of women in their global value chains. In the last 12 months, we've really integrated climate change into the remit of the WOW programme and been exploring ways to enhance the economic empowerment of women while tackling climate change and enabling women to be real drivers and agents of change. The report we're launching today is called From Risks to Rewards: Overcoming the Impacts of Climate Change on Women in Agricultural Supply Chains. And it incorporates the findings from WOW's research with three partners: Primark, the Ethical Tea Partnership, and Waitrose. The report includes some really good recommendations on how to economically empower women in agricultural supply chains whilst also tackling climate change. We've got a great panel both here in the room and online. Hopefully we'll be able to see our online panelists. Hello, here they are. Welcome. So we're going to spend the next 45 minutes or so discussing their ideas and solutions from what's raised in the report and from their own experiences. Alongside me in the room, I'm delighted to be joined by Sunita Patamba. So she's the Associate Director for Gender Mainstreaming and Access to Services and Infrastructure Development at EBRD. She told me I didn't have to say the whole mouthful of her title, but anyway, you get the idea. EBRD is the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which most of you will know, but its mission is to invest in changing lives, and it works across 3 continents and 40 countries. So I think we're going to get a lot of wealth of experience out of Sunita. And then to her left is Ellen Brooks, who's a climate change exec at British International Investment, which was, others of you may know formerly as CDC. BII, or CDC, has been around since 1948, so it's done 70 years or so of being the UK's flagship development finance institution, at the forefront of supporting companies that help developing and emerging countries grow. And I really like their mission, which is to be productive, sustainable, and inclusive, and that, for me, really, really resonated. Then turning to our panellists online, in the top left on the screen as we look at it in the room, we've got Barney Smythe, who is an ethics and sustainability specialist at the Waitrose Foundation, part of the John Lewis Partnership. Now, supermarkets play that great role in giving us our food, but sometimes we don't think enough about where it comes from and who across the world picks, packs, and grows that fresh food and flowers that we all like to buy. Through the work of the foundation that Barney leads, they work with suppliers to fund local projects that help improve lives of workers. Then to his right on our screen, we've got Diana Onyango, who's technical manager at Farm Africa. This is a charity which aims to reduce poverty in Eastern Africa, helping farmers grow more, and sell for more. She's carried out one of the WOW research pieces in Kenya, and I really look forward to hearing the insights from that research later. And last but not by no means least, Diana Dalton, who's head of gender and equality at the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office of the UK government, where she leads on gender equality, violence against women and girls, LGBT+ rights, disability inclusion and social protection. So again, a very wide-ranging portfolio. She also, interestingly, previously headed the Department for International Development UK's research department for agriculture and food security. So lots of really interesting expertise to draw from. So welcome to my panel and welcome to everyone in the room. So we've only got one mic, so I'm going to be passing it around, and we'll be very orchestrated with those of you online. I want to start by looking at why is it important that we think about climate change and gender as intertwined issues rather than separate issues. So, why has your organization started to think about it? Was it from a risk perspective, a rewards perspective, or both? And maybe, Diana Onyango, maybe I can start with you from a Farm Africa perspective. What have you seen in the market and how have you approached this?
Okay, thank you, Emma. We do understand climate change does impose a huge impact on the smallholder farmers, on their production and productivity. And this affects issues around poverty alleviation, food security, and their sustainable development. And
Diana, pause 1 second. We want to try and just turn you up a little bit if we can.
Okay.
We're just going to shut the door. I don't know if you can increase your volume a little bit as well. Perfect. Try again.
I hope you can hear me.
Oh, loud and clear now.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, so as I was saying, smallholders are dependent on rain-fed, especially those dependent on rain-fed agriculture have been greatly impacted by the irregularities that have been brought around by climate change. And we do see that women and men experience these impacts differently. This is due to the sociocultural roles and responsibilities. For example, women in these traditional settings, we find that key assets are actually owned by men. Women do not have this access to the resources. Women do not have that decision-making ability on how to even use this the assets. Women might also be challenged with issues around credit and financial empowerment, so they do not have the financial ability to institute some changes that they would want to do in their household, among other challenges. And then, of course, women are also burdened by the unpaid work of the domestic care that they have to provide at the household level. So we do see that women are impacted in various ways, and they are very vulnerable to climate change, especially now the smallholder farmers. Other impacts are around increased workload. For example, at the farm, at the household, they have to walk longer distances in search of water and firewood. They have to take on casual labor, probably even working on other people's farm to substitute their income. And we can see that it can also exacerbate these gender inequalities that we are seeing in agriculture and beyond. And it's not just a matter of righting the wrong or providing this. We also have to understand their abilities, their knowledge, and to see how that can be used to address the barriers that they are facing. Also the barriers that women, smallholder farmers and farm workers are facing in adopting activities that could improve their climate resilience in the fresh produce and horticulture supply chains, as we were focusing on. So the barriers can be in terms of knowledge, skills, economic empowerment, access to services. So addressing these barriers, such as by upskilling the women on adoption of climate change mitigation practices, increasing their resilience to climate change, and also looking at increasing the resilience of their livelihoods by promoting economic empowerment, leadership, financial literacy, can have an impact on improving their resilience. And this can also be done by engaging in sustainable green businesses or promoting climate smart agriculture practices that they can then incorporate in their agricultural practices.
Thank you, Diana. There's a lot to take in there. I think if we pause on that there and bring Barney in, because hearing that, Barney, how does the work that you at Waitrose are doing bring those two aspects together of, if you like, the gender lens and the climate lens and the ethics and motivation behind that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's lots of great examples from Diana. I suppose the motivation for the John Lewis Partnership is, of course, and directly linked back to the risks and rewards, which I can come on to, that Diana was describing. But primarily, it really links back to our purpose as a business. So the John Lewis Partnership is a purpose-led business, and within that, we exist to make just sufficient profit to do good in the communities in which we operate, and that's really sort of written into our constitution. So our North Star is that we are working in partnership for a happier world, and that spans happier business, happier people, and a happier world. And the activation of the purpose really comes from very top of the organisation and underpins all of our activity, and spans the scale of our operations, which are 70 suppliers, 70 tier 1 suppliers, sorry, 2,000 tier 1 suppliers, and 70 countries. And within the purpose-led sort of business structure, we've got really wide range of environmental and social responsibility ambitions. So we know that we want to be net zero by 2050, focusing on reducing our carbon emissions. And also from a human rights perspective, we really want to support everybody in our supply chain to realise their fundamental human rights and champion worker voice. So of course, there's a lot of overlap between our social and environmental ambition, and particularly with gender and climate, as we want to decarbonise our supply chain. So through delivering our strategy and through activating our purpose, and particularly through the programme of work that we're doing with WOW and with Farm Africa, we anticipate seeing some really key benefits that do sort of support that motivation linked to the purpose. So that there are risks that we hope to manage better. So drawing on what Diana was saying, we want to sort of recognise that sort of gender rights and participation are a key challenge, and we want to make progress in really levelling the ground for women in Kenya's flower industry. But there's also really great rewards that we want to see as well. So we know that investing in and empowering workers builds stronger supply chain relationships and continues to make more resilient supply. But importantly, what we're really hoping to see, what motivates us, is sort of happier people, happier business, and happier world. So yeah, linking back to the original question, sort of leading motivation does stem from our purpose and being a purpose-led business, but there is a great opportunity for us to better manage risk and see rewards as a result of that.
So lots of holistic benefits there that we've heard from both Diana and from Barney. Ellen, I'd like to bring you in. You're an investor. So can you tell us a little from BII's perspective what your motivations are?
Yes, very happy to. So a little bit about BII to put it in context. BII, or British International Investments, is the UK's development finance institution. So we are 100% owned by the Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office, so great that we've got the shareholder on the call. But really, we are investing aid money in private sector businesses, whether that's in Africa or South Asia, to make financial returns, of course, but really to create impact. So we're an impact investor. And that's really why we're interested in gender and climate. That's what motivates us. And we've been looking at gender and climate separately as like key impact areas for us for many years. We've got a climate finance target, we've got a gender finance target. And then about 2 years ago, alongside EBRD and EIB, we really took a closer look at the gender and climate nexus. So why would you bring these seemingly perhaps quite disconnected areas together, particularly if you're interested in investment? What we found through that work, which we did under the umbrella of the 2X Collaborative, was that there's a really clear investment case for bringing the gender and climate nexus together. So there's a great impact case. A lot can be said about resilience. We've already heard that women are disproportionately affected by climate change. And on top of that, women are disproportionately part of the solution. So that's it in one sentence. And what that means for impact is that climate mitigation or climate adaptation is more effective if you mainstream gender within it. But actually, as a private sector investor, there's also a great business case here. So we know that women are more likely to start climate-focused businesses. And that's a great opportunity for climate tech investors. We know that gender diverse workforces and particularly gender diverse leadership often have better risk management. Again, that's great for investors. This also translates into better management of climate risk, which is great if you're a long-term investor. And we also know that women influence about 80% of purchasing decisions globally. And they are also more likely to buy a sustainable product. So if you're a business like Waitrose or you're a business that's selling a sustainable product, you simply cannot afford to discount women consumers as part of your design. And so every way through the gender value chain in the private sector, there's a case for mainstreaming gender and climate together. And that's really the research that we did, both looking at our own portfolio, but also with the partners when we created something called the Gender Smart Climate Finance Guide. It's the toolkit that's on the 2X Collaborative's website. All the evidence we found for this impact and business case is housed on there, including lots of other resources, which I probably don't have time to go into. But yes, that's really why we're so passionate about this topic.
Ellen, I'm completely sold on what you've just said. So why isn't everybody already doing it? Pass the mic back to you for a moment.
Oh, that's a tough question. I really think there's still a lot of patriarchy, both in the COP system, in the private sector, in the financial system, in the investment system. And that's particularly why we brought this together, because it felt intuitive that women were a great investment to make. By investing in women, you're going to be more profitable and you're going to have more impact. And we know that in our hearts, but really the point of bringing this case together is that we can make this case in a rational argument, we can make it based on individual investments, we can make it based on impact, we could do more reports, research. So we felt like we needed to bring this evidence case forward because I think there are still structures within the finance system, within the investment system that mean that women aren't equally at the table, even at this COP. And so I think there's still a lot to be done to really get past those barriers.
Thanks, Ellen. And as you said, a fundamental part of that is the investment side of it. So, Sunita, having listened to Farm Africa, Waitrose, and BII's perspective, from EBRD's perspective, what's the business case in your organisation, and what are the types of steps that you've taken?
Thank you very much, Emma, and maybe I'll just build on what Ellen has said already. I think we've been saying that having gender equality or promoting gender equality in climate action is not a good to have, it's a need to have. And the business case is actually very clear. I mean, we have research which has shown that if in a scenario where men and women were to participate equally in the labor force, there's potential to grow annual GDP globally by about 28 trillion US dollars by 2030. So this is the first step. Then we have seen where the new improvements, as we all as a global community start working our way towards the Paris Agreement outcomes, towards climate action, there are going to be sectors where there's going to be new employment in the green sectors. We know, for example, in sustainable agriculture, there's potential for about 8 million jobs. In the water sector, there's about potential for about 21,000 jobs. In the manufacturing, about 24,000 jobs. At the same time, when we look at how many women are participating in particular sectors, it doesn't match the ambition of the jobs that are going to be created. For example, in construction, globally there are only about 19% women participation in the sector. In the water sector, which is one of the climate-affected sectors, it's only 1%. So we really have that sort of dichotomy where we know where the opportunities are, but we're not doing anything about it. At the same time, we have seen, and this is new research which has been produced, that where companies have shown to have or have made an effort to have more women in senior leadership, they are able to show globally a 0.1% decrease in greenhouse gas emissions. So this is the kind of evidence that we've been asking for, and it's research that has recently been shared with everyone. So I think that is the business case that we want to take advantage of. It's not a good to have, it's necessary, because companies are looking for efficiencies, companies are looking to be more relevant in markets, they would like to be able to tap into new emerging markets, and this is where it's going to happen. At the same time, we know that in climate strategies such as NDCs, while there is progress, a lot of NDCs have mentioned gender, there is still very little implementation, actual action that has been identified. So this means, again, with the current situation of global climate strategies or nationally, where there are climate strategies, we may still, because of the absence of proper actions to implement gender equality, we may still delay in promoting gender equality by about 15 to 20 years. So this is in a combination, a public and a private sector view of how we are missing the opportunity. Very quickly for the EBRD, this is an important area and we've been working on it for a few years now. We have our new two strategies, the gender strategy and the equality of opportunity strategy, which were approved by our board in last year, November. And the two strategies very clearly lay out what we need to do in specifically with private sector, but also to sort of address the challenges of climate change and other external shocks, which will have long-term impact. So for example, we have a program called the Green Cities. The Green Cities flagship program is an important program that has been around for about 12 years. And what the program does is that works with cities where they want to become green, helps them to develop an action plan of where they could become green, which are the sectors, wastewater treatment, waste recycling, some of the jobs in the sector services where they can become green. But while identifying that action plan, we also help them to address gender and inclusion issues. So for example, if a city wanted to develop a new sort of a transport sector, we'd advise them to also consider safe transport, where we're using apps, using digital technology to help them to think about clean transport, but which is also gender responsive. We're also looking at, for example, with the inclusive and socially responsible procurement processes, which we are now piloting with the Western Balkans Investment Fund, where we are helping projects and countries to identify, first of all, policy gaps in the procurement governance, and then working with them to see where we can bring in gender and climate action in the procurement policies, speaking to the areas of supply chain, where we, again, on another level, work with partner financial institutions, help them to identify female entrepreneurs who are in the supply chain and help them to extend advisory services, training, and be able to access more climate finance to become active members. So these are really some examples of where we have taken action, and this is the way to go, and we are increasing slowly we're increasing our impact on the ground. We're working with partners like BII and others, and making sure that we all are able to work together, but also towards the same objective, and that's important. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunita. And I think what's really important there is you're saying you're not doing it on your own, you're doing it in partnership, because we need to accelerate that action. So Diana Dalton, if I can bring you in here. We've heard about the importance of thinking about gender and climate together. We've heard about the business case, but we've also heard about the rapid need to accelerate action. So from the FCDO's perspective, can you give us some insights on how you're looking from a policy angle and from a real action implementation angle to accelerate action and use your influence to accelerate action on climate and gender?
Yes, I can do. Thanks very much. Can you hear me okay? Is that volume all right?
Yes, it's fine, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to say something slightly odd going on with my computer. So it's like there's a gremlin in there. So if I suddenly get cut off, then my apologies. I'm not quite sure what it is. Might be something to do with the Zoom connection. But Yes, I mean, that's a sort of million-dollar question, isn't it? We're obviously in our own way trying to explore what exactly we as a government actor can do. And I wanted to, and we're far from having all the answers. A lot of stuff is relatively experimental as we gather more evidence of what can work, what's the most effective intervention, what will get the sort of greatest returns, if you like. But I just wanted to start by talking about the WOW programme, obviously. And we're really pleased with the progress that the programme has made in terms of, sorry, it's something going on with my list. So since its conception back in 2018, it's managed to support over 110,000 women, obviously originally set up as a broad women's economic empowerment program, but it has evolved over time because we're finding out new things, there are new challenges, we've got to be ready to sort of pivot and respond to different things. And so it has done this to focus much more on the intersection of climate and gender. And last year at COP26, the programme generated a Women and Net Zero Toolkit. And you may have come across it, people who have joined this event today. It is publicly available and it's designed to give businesses an insight into transitioning within their own supply chains. The programme has also created research partnerships, which are behind the excellent report being launched today, and it's facilitated events to contribute to the important conversation around this broad issue. So, for example, in March earlier this year, the FCDO and Minister Ford, who was our minister at the time, who's now moved on actually, but they co-hosted a fascinating discussion with Dr. Rania Al-Mashat on empowering women and girls through a just transition to a green economy. So programs, activities like that help to advance the conversation and explore the ways in which we can enable meaningful action on climate change and gender. So increasing the amount of guidance available for the private sector in relation to how they act to take the opportunity to address gender and climate is obviously a focus for us. We've also facilitated what we hope has been meaningful public-private sector collaboration that has enabled companies like M&S and Waitrose to explore the changes that they're able to make in their own supply chain. But I also wanted to mention some other action on climate and gender we've taken, just to give a sense of what we've tried and the wider approach coming from the UK government. So through the UK-funded Climate Ambition Support Alliance, which is known as CASA, we are supporting the European Capacity Building Initiative Women's Leadership Network, and that aims to convene female negotiators in different forums to share their experiences and build their networks, and also increase the level of female participation in senior leadership roles and therefore ultimately in important decision making, which is so crucial and at the heart of effective climate action. And then there's everything that we were busy with in relation to COP26, that's now ongoing. And just a reminder of those, we announced £165 million in new funding, and that included £120 million to build resilience, prevent pollution, protect biodiversity and strengthen renewable energy and better waste management, whilst also supporting women's leadership, their access to finance, their education and skills in Bangladesh, and also up to £45 million to help empower local communities and grassroots women's groups in Asia and the Pacific to challenge gender inequalities and adapt to the impacts of climate change. So activities like that are in implementation, and obviously we are learning as we deliver those on country-specific action. And it's really, really great to have a colleague here from BII today, as we're also turning our attention much more to the green financing and how to secure a gender lens as an automatic consideration when considering public and private investment into the sector. It's critical. It will generate a legacy of much higher impact investments if gender responsiveness is built into design at the outset and is not considered as a bolt-on after something has been created. So it's really fantastic to come here today together to ensure that all of our future approaches do just that. Thanks, I'll finish there.
Diana, that's brilliant. That's a really comprehensive overview of everything that's going on. I'd like to do a little bit of a deep dive now, maybe into the findings, Diana Onyango, that you had from the WOW research, because we are launching this report today, and I think it helps to bring to life the challenges that all the other panelists have spoken about. Would you like to just give a little bit of an overview about the research and what that showed and what we've learned from it?
Yeah, sure, Emma. So Farm Africa conducted the research with, in partnership with Waitrose, where we were looking at the horticulture and fresh produce supply chains in Kenya. And we were looking at two key objectives that we wanted to achieve in that research. One is to understand the challenges and opportunities that women are facing in the horticulture and fresh produce supply chains, as well as come up with realistic recommendations or actions that we can take to help them adapt and mitigate climate risk, and also identify opportunities where they can then create value out of, basically to shift to a net zero horticulture and fresh produce production. So the key findings, one, as Sunita was mentioning, the percentages of women involved in different supply chains. We see that in Kenya, for example, in the flower farms, 75% of the women, the workers are women, while only 25% are men. But when it comes to now the benefits, you'll find that there is some kind of imbalance there. So as I explained earlier, women and the women farmers and farm workers, they experience the worsening impacts of climate change. But they cannot apply this mitigation and adaptation measures. And this is what we found out in the research. We find that women have less access to training and lower educational attainment. This is because the training is not tailored to their needs. We find that male farmers are more, they take priority when it comes to training, but training that is tailored to the women's needs, considering their roles and responsibilities at the household level, are not really implemented. Then the women are also not able to really voice their opinions. They're not able to also hold leadership positions when it comes to now community groups. And they're also not able to take decisions or to make decisions that also will impact on the practices that they engage in. For example, if they want them to integrate climate smart agriculture practices in their farming practices, you find that the men's decision or the men's dominance will take over, and thus we need to develop or create interactions with extension officers or seed companies that are able to approach or directly support the women and address these gender gaps. Address gender gaps also when it comes to control of income and work opportunities. And this can be done through providing access to credit and borrowing, because that's another challenge that they are facing, coupled with the lack of asset ownership, as I had mentioned earlier. So this kind of unequal access to opportunities and access access to opportunities to be able to change their practices to more climate smart practices is what is challenging women the most. Then it's also now burdened with the household responsibilities that they have, because we find that women are responsible for 75% of all the unpaid care, the domestic work, and they spend 4.5 hours a day as compared to only 2 hours by men, because women are the primary caregivers, and this also limits the time that they are able to engage in sustainable or substantial income generating activities. So basically, that is what we found out from the research.
Well, I hope everybody took all of that in. I think I've got to go away and read it all over again. But there's huge amounts of insight that's come from the work that you've done, Diana. And I think the trick is, how do we then put actionable solutions in place to help involve and empower those women so that they have more voice, they get the training and the skills that they need, and they learn the techniques for climate smart agriculture that you were outlining there. Barney, maybe turning to you and hearing what Diana was outlining, what was it that inspired you to form the partnership with Farm Africa, and what do you think makes a good partnership? So, you know, you've been working with the WOW programme for some time now. What is it about that that's enabled you to think in a different way and make progress?
Yeah, so we've been working with Farm Africa for a few years, who've been delivering the Waitrose Foundation activity in East Africa. And across all of our work for the foundation, we're really reliant on partnerships, and we know that there's such a range of challenges that we want to tackle. We can't do it alone. And also, flowers is a really sort of commercially strategic category for us. We know that we want to have a big impact in the work that we're doing. But the partnerships that we do look to form are ones with business or people or NGOs who really sort of share our vision and purpose, and together ones which we can achieve a common goal. So for the case of our recent partnership with the WOW programme, we needed that real technical expertise and on-the-ground engagement with farms, which is what Farm Africa are really leading the way with. And they have significant experience in East Africa. And then in order to also build on the work that we're doing, and with our WOW partnership, we recognise that we wanted, we could benefit from additional support with gender expertise and monitoring and evaluation resource. So the FCDO really enabled us to have this through the consortium of WOW partners, and allowed us to really apply a robust gender lens to this project and build another thematic layer of work, and all reaching towards our shared goal, which is quite critical. Then hopefully the role that we see ourselves playing as a retailer is that we have the supply chain structure and we have the business in order to pilot these initiatives, and most importantly, we can hopefully scale up the successes and the learnings across both brands. So it really gives a bit of sort of longevity and expansion opportunities to the partnership. And I think also it's important to note that within this topic and within this theme, we're looking to reach net zero in a sort of just and ethical way for the business, and it's a common goal within many internal teams as well. So we know that there's a variety of different challenges faced and interventions required across different teams, whether that could be things like engaging suppliers or setting targets and roadmaps and stuff. So really strong internal partnerships, and in this case between our climate team and within our human rights team, is also key to making it a success and working towards our shared goal.
So Barney, that's the importance of a shared goal, but then you've had to bring lots of different parties together that don't normally work together, including that real deep technical expertise and the on-the-ground experts. Ellen, maybe I'll bring you in from BII's perspective. So you invest. What sort of partnerships do you put together, and what makes that successful, or where are there challenges?
Thank you. And well, just before I dig into that, congrats on the research. It sounds really interesting and look forward to reading it. I think some of the findings are really relevant to particularly what we're seeing in our agricultural investments and really the gender and climate nexus there. So your question was on partnerships. I think our most important partnerships are with our investees, whether that's directly when we've invested in a company and so we might sit on the board of that company, or whether it's when we invest via a financial institution or a fund manager. And that's really helpful because we can really amplify our impact by investing our capital into a financial intermediary who can then maybe invest smaller ticket sizes or in markets that they know better than us. And so that really sort of amplifies our reach. And so I think our most important partnerships are with our investees. We work with them in a variety of ways. So we have a brilliant ESG team, a gender team, and a climate team, which I sit in. And we will, when the investments first come through our investment process, understand the gender risks, the gender opportunities, the climate risks, the climate opportunities, and whether this qualifies as gender smart climate finance. And then through the investment process, we'll get to know the company, and post-investment, we'll work with them in partnership to implement some of these real impact projects that we want to see. And so to give you a tangible example, we've recently made an investment in the African Forestry Impact Platform. This is a fund which is going to, hopes to close $500 million for investing in sustainable forestry across sub-Saharan Africa, which is a really, in my view, exciting market, but with less investment going into it than it deserves. And therefore, BII alongside Norfund and FinFund have anchored this fund. We're partnering with New Forests, who are a fund manager and have great expertise in investing in sustainable forestry, but they've done that traditionally in different markets and not in Africa. So this is definitely a climate investment, it's sustainable forestry, but what we really wanted to enshrine is also the gender impact here. And so we've worked with the fund manager to understand what's the gender baseline for each asset is, and what improvement on gender inclusion within that business could look like. And that sort of impact goal is enshrined into the fund structure, and it's enshrined into the way that we expect to see both the impact and the financial returns from that fund. We've also done that in terms of biodiversity and in terms of carbon. And so by baking these impact targets into our investment structure, we can really align the finance with the impact that we want to see. I'm really excited about that example because I think this is still quite emerging best practice in the impact investment industry of aligning your impact to your structuring and your targets, particularly with impact linked performance. So that's just one example of how we work.
Ellen, I think that sounds fantastic. I'm really impressed by what you're doing, and I look forward to seeing the results of that combination. Maybe Sunita, bringing you in from an EBRD perspective, do you feel that your governance structures and the way that you go about investing is set up to promote the sort of partnerships that promote gender and climate, or what changes are needed in order to make that more front of mind? And then maybe Diana D., we can come to you from a government perspective in terms of those policy levers.
Thank you very much, Emma. I think just like Ellen has mentioned, we need to start with partnerships with an objective of what we're trying to achieve. And really, in order to promote gender equality in climate action, some key actions are needed in improving, improved green skills, access to green jobs, more entrepreneurs, female entrepreneurs in the green economy, green sectors. So in order to achieve this, the partnerships that we can really build are to help us to bring this to concrete action. So for example, one of the areas that we've been very successful in is building the sector skills councils. So for example, here in Egypt, we have had a very long standing partnership with a Suwaidi company, the electricity and electrical manufacturing company. What we started out to do with them is to help them to build talent for their manufacturing, for their factories and other areas. Then the foundation, the company itself, found this area very, very interesting, and it set up its own Suwaidi Training Academy. And what it's meant to do is that with our help, we have set up a private sector and public sector steering committee, which helps to identify those skills which will be needed in this industry, say for the next 10, 15 years, and start investing in those skills, start bringing in policy areas or policy changes that need to happen to bring in more skills in those areas. So that really has led, for example, in this new area of green economy, and this is really an important area for us to contribute, bringing in more women, more youth as well. Another area is the importance of policy, using private sector investments to bring in policy change, which is what, for example, Dr. Rani Al-Mashad has said also this morning, that we need private sector to help implement those policies that have been established. So, for example, with some of our work in Kazakhstan, what we've done in the renewable energy sector, we have worked with the Ministry of Energy to remove restrictions from about 280 occupations which limited women from taking jobs in those sectors. So it was a very long process, but we've managed to do that, and a number of them are in the energy, in the renewable energy. And as we know, Kazakhstan is increasingly implementing or investing in renewable energy. This is going to again open up new economic opportunities for women and youth as well. Another area of partnership which is very important is with technical training institutions, because we realize that a lot of talent, a lot of technical skills do not have the required industry standard certification, which does not allow them to take the new opportunities. So helping companies to lead on developing these training programs, to lead on establishing certification with existing training institutions has become quite an important enabler for women to create and take these new opportunities. I mentioned briefly the work that we're doing with our partner financial institutions, investing in those partner financial institutions, but really working with the climate funds to help these partner financial institutions bring out new products and new areas where women could really take advantage from the climate finance as well. So these are areas which we have been working on with the companies. We also have partners. We're, again, a very long-standing partner with the Generation Equality, UN Women, and that discussion for the last 2 years helped us also to think about what we can do as an EBRD contribution to concrete actions. So we have just this afternoon launched the Gender Equality and Climate Action Accelerator, which helps companies and ministries identify gender policy gaps in their path to Paris outcomes. And by doing that, they can actually show that they have made progress over the years, and it helps them to access new markets, new financing opportunities as well. So these are some of the areas that we think could really unlock the potential while also helping build new and green sectors as well. Thank you.
Again, wow and wow. So real opportunities there for the empowerment of women, unlocking the policy levers. Diana D., listening to that and thinking about the FCDO's mandate, can you give some examples of the sort of partnerships you think that, as the UK government, you can use to help overcome barriers to progress on gender and climate?
Yes, thanks very much. I mean, what a lot of rich responses already to that question, and I suppose that reflects just how many ways there are to answer this question, because at the macro level, there are obviously international partnerships, which I'll start with, but also the local partnerships are absolutely key. And I wanted to just start actually with climate finance, because I think this is an area of, well, just has to be an area of focus. And what we need is to agree that those providing climate finance and those involved in the governance of its use put gender responsiveness at its core. And by this, I mean that the disbursement of funding goes only to activity that has properly mainstream gender and inclusion. So deliberately considering the reach to the most vulnerable and marginalised into its approach, Plus, it ensures that funding reaches down to the grassroots level, women's-led organisations who, firstly, must be part of decision-making, and secondly, must be supported to scale up as frontline responders. So we know the important role of women in responding. We know that climate solutions are more effective if women are part of the dialogue and the discussion and the decision making. So, you know, any climate finance that goes towards activity that doesn't do that is part wasted. So we also know that funding for education of girls around the issues of climate change and their future roles in that is a critical part of that. So climate and education and funding for the right sort of activity there is also part of the solution. So in terms of what partnerships are needed to make all of that happen, we're obviously talking about government as donors, national governments and their role in the decision making around how climate finance is channeled in their country, particularly in those who are worst affected by climate change, and then that downward on-stream funding to the right sorts of organisations that are responding and making the voices of women and girls heard. So we too are working with the Action Coalition on Feminist Action for Climate Justice at the Generation Equality Forum. So we've affirmed our commitment to that and championing women and girls' climate leadership, education and decision making while working to build long-term resilience. But that still really, in all honesty, has to be converted into reality to move beyond words and in good intentions into actual practical machinery to make it happen. And then obviously secondly, because there are so many partnerships that we could talk about, it won't surprise you to hear me say there's a need for partnerships with the private sector to collaborate and incentivize change. So we've heard a lot about the WOW programme today, quite rightly too, and then working closely to provide that technical assistance in piloting schemes across different supply chains. And we have learned a lot from that. Since 2018, there's been some really excellent partnerships with different companies to help them think more strategically about women's economic empowerment. And now we're really excited to see that new partnerships are developing which work at the intersection of gender and climate resilience, which I mentioned before. So I think the report we're launching today speaks actually better than I can about this. So what I thought I'd do was just end by quoting something from the report, which is that no single actor can create gender and climate smart supply chains. It really requires concerted action by multiple stakeholders from local and national governments to investors, corporate buyers, cooperatives, input suppliers, and ultimately the prices that are set and expected by the end users, the consumers. So innovative partnerships that tackle those issues across the full value chain from the source to consumer are required. So I'll leave it there, as that speaks volumes, I think. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Diana, and that's a great quote from a report that I hope all of you will go away and download. We've just got a few minutes left for some questions, if there are any from anybody in the room or online.
Thank you. First, thank you all to all of the presenters for sharing the work that you've already done and the collaborations moving forward. It's very heartwarming. My name's Elizabeth Ployce. I'm with the U.S. Agency for International Development. And one of my questions for you, I feel like I could have many, is to what extent, and then what was the process for harmonizing the different standards or definitions or ways of measuring what you're trying to do? I imagine each entity started with this idea, but in order to really change the supply chain, it would probably really help the private sector if everyone had the same definitions of what, you know, gender responsive supply chains and procurement really meant.
Ellen, would you like to pick that up in the first place?
Sure, I can talk about how we define gender smart climate finance. Sunita, do chip in, because you know what I'm going to say. there is this organisation called the 2X Collaborative, and it really is the industry body for gender lens investing. The 2X criteria, there are 4 levels. So it's entrepreneurship, leadership, employment, and consumption. And then there's a 5th category for investments in financial intermediaries. Each of those levels has a threshold with it. If your women's representation is above, you could potentially qualify as a 2X qualified investment. And that is what we as an industry have said is a gender responsive investment. And so for climate finance investors, we take climate taxonomies, whether that's the MDB taxonomy or the EU taxonomy for green finance. There's multiple green taxonomies, and overlay the 2X criteria on top of it. And that's how we can credibly say this is a gender smart climate finance investment. That is part of the solution for investing supply chains, but I think your question was a bit more complicated around there's different ways to view that in the supply chain. But at least as an investment community, EBRD's signed up to 2X, BII is, multiple DFIs and MDBs are, really excitingly, multiple private investors are also part of the 2X collaborative, and we're seeing real harmonization around this. I think the next step for us now is that this has very much been led out to the gender community, very much DFI-led initially, which was the 2X challenge, is really to engage climate finance investors, people like GFANZ, people like the Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance, who I think are asking these questions around how do we make our climate finance more inclusive. But really the 2X challenge, the 2X criteria is there to offer the answer on the gender dimension of that. There's obviously multiple dimensions to inclusive climate finance, but I think it's a really great step forward. The harmonization, I have seen it through my time at BII. It's happened really quickly. I think it's a really great example of us coming together as an investor community.
Well, I wouldn't add much more. As Ellen already said, we're all partners. I mean, most of us MDBs, IFIs, we're working together on the 2X challenge, and we've also had quite a long discussion on this important question, that there is a need for a standard, there's need for standardization. So I, as a company, know what I'm supposed to do, and then we aggregate that going together. So that's all I would say.
But Barney or Diana, either of the Dianas, but Barney or Diana, at a ground level, how easy is it to provide the measures in in a standard way that actually people like Ellen and Sunita are asking for? And maybe Barney, does that give you the information you need? But maybe Diana O, starting with you, and then we'll draw it to a close in a minute. So just a very quick answer.
It's a bit tricky. It's a bit challenging to apply those standards because when we're looking at, for example, horticulture supply chains, they're a bit different from the fresh produce supply chains because we are working with different categories of women, for example, because we have smallholder women farmers in one supply chain and we have women workers in the other supply chain. So it's not easy to kind of like standardize this kind of like measures or definitions. But then again, you know, when you're trying also to come up with solutions or interventions, you kind of like have to contextualize it depending on the supply chain that you're working with.
Thank you, Diana. And Barney, any thoughts on what you use to evaluate?
Yeah, no, I would agree with Diana. And from our side, we're very focused on making sure that we've got a really rigorous monitoring and evaluation framework, which we have a lot of support with from partners, and it all feeds into our wider human rights ambition, human rights strategy, and that of the Waitrose Foundation to not using sort of wider frameworks at the moment.
Thanks, Barney. Other Diana, anything you wanted to add or not in relation to that?
Well, I mean, it is, you know, we're very good at making demands, aren't we, as a country?
We try and respond.
Exactly. So I feel it might be a bit rich, me coming up with more ideas. But I suppose probably what I'm more interested in is the target setting. You know, what are we trying to achieve? So we, you know, personally, I would really like to see a gender target on all climate finance. But as yet, we haven't got a standard agreed for that. But actually, you know, when we looked at our pre-COP26, when we looked at our own measures around what climate finance that we were spending did have a gender kind of lens or gender responsive element to it, it was actually quite positive. So I think we could aspire to more in that respect, and that would be something I'd like to see the FCDO pursuing. And we are also going to launch a new Women and Girls strategy at the beginning of, well, in the first quarter probably of next year, which will have obviously climate change as a really key issue within it. So would have to set some accountability frameworks for that and delivery targets as well. So be consulting a bit more on that. Thanks.
So thank you all. We've run to the top of the hour. I've really enjoyed it. I feel like I've learned a lot, and I'm, you know, blown away by the quality of the research that has come out in the report. I'm really inspired by everything that EBRD, BII, John Lewis Partnerships and the FCDO are doing here to really promote that intertwining of gender and climate. And Diana at Farm Africa, really inspiring what you're doing on the ground, really helping drive change. So thank you to all my great panelists. Please do go read the report. It's on the on the FCDO website under if you look for work and opportunities for women. And I want to do a little advertisement for a drinks reception. For those of you, sadly, those online, you'll have to have a virtual drink. But anyone who is around who can join us at 6:30 over at the Business Pavilion for Climate Action, that's Pavilion number 118, for some drinks and ongoing discussion about the just transition, women and climate. Please do join us there. But in the meantime, big thank you to my panel and have a great evening.